dealing tonight with lesson number 13 in this book by Brother Tyler, and is dealing with Exodus 5 through 7. So we'll look at that for a little while this evening. When you talk about the land of Egypt, you're talking about the land that's along the Nile here, and that is the very source of life. Nothing that is very far away from the Nile is able to have life sustaining, because it needs that water that will be there for the irrigation and everything else, and we'll notice that in a minute. But if you'll notice, the upper part is called Lower Egypt, the lower part is called Upper Egypt. And why would that be? More or less like you have with Bible times. Okay, altitude, you're going down to sea level here at the Mediterranean and back up here higher. This is Karnak right there, and then you have several other cities down here that are cities of note. Luxor would be about right there. These are the ones that are the main regal place, that which has to do with the pharaohs. It's further inland than the Delta. The Delta was a place where they had those who were farmers and workers, but that wasn't the area where most of the pharaohs and the higher culture there in Egypt existed. This map talks about how you have that life along there. It goes through the various places where that was. These are all back in the wilderness wandering lessons too, if you want to go back, in the first 4 of them especially. And this life is associated along the river there. If you take a look at Egypt in that kind of a shaded area, what we're talking about, what you notice is, of all of that area, it's just this that's green. Few that go out here by a reservoir or some other things that would be there, a spring that would be naturally occurring. You've got some civilization away from the river in that way, but not much. Most of it is down here in the Valley of the Kings. That's where most of the excavation has taken place of the historical areas, especially the pyramids that have been the burial places of the pharaohs. Most of that is down in this area, and then right around in that area as well. Here's where Luxor is. Thebes here that you hear spoken of. Aswan is what you have today as a place spoken of after the leader there of Aswan and the Aswan Dam. You have the Asuyat, who is there. Here's Hierapolis. Here's where you would have of Memphis, right at the edge of that delta. Memphis would be also another place of a great deal of trade. And then Alexander was up here on the far northwest side of that delta. And so that's the areas that you're talking about of Egypt that are mostly populated and where their culture would be around. Here's how it is. Last time when we went through this, we noted, when you look at the areas that are irrigated, they're green. And if you fly over Egypt and notice the things, you'll see here's this little area that may be green, and then right after that, and I mean a very sharp break off, it's grass, and 2 feet away, it's sand dunes. And that's the way you have that break exists that starkly all the way down. So whatever they've irrigated, they've used in the fields, you'll have that. The rest of it is just this kind of a sand and desert-looking area. When we talk about an outline of the book of Exodus, I want to do this rather than going through what's in every chapter this time. It's more usable to keep in your mind an outline of the book of Exodus. Chapter 1, here as it's starting out, talks about Moses before his call, his birth and early years, the murder of the Egyptian, journey from Egypt to Midian, taking of Zipporah for his wife, the call that is given to him at the burning bush, the journey from Midian back in to Egypt and the meeting of Aaron and the elders of Israel. That's where you have the first 4 chapters. That's mostly what Kurt dealt with on Sunday. Tonight, we're going to talk about the first and the second meeting here of Pharaoh. The first one taking place chapter 5, the second one in chapter 7. In the middle of that, you have a statement that's given to Moses once more that the promise that was delivered to Abraham, God remembers. He still knows about that promise and intends to fulfill it with the land promise that's there. And then you have the genealogies, which are genealogies that are kind of the strangest of all the genealogies, basically, that we've got in the Old Testament, in a way. You come along, you have the first few sons of Jacob, 4, but then you go to Levi, the 4th, and you're going to deal with Levi for the rest of the time, so it gets into his genealogy alone. The last part of our chapter 7 will be in turning the water into blood, and so we'll look at that here this evening. Now, there's the rest of it, if you will. This is all going to stay on the presentations. If you want to look at something in the future, we'll do that, and then I'll send this each time to Kurt as well, and we'll have that same outline available to you. Any questions there on the outline of where we're going, where we've been? All right, let's go on then. Talk about chapter 5. What happens in chapter 5 in that first meeting that takes place with Moses, Aaron, and Pharaoh? What does he ask for? What does Moses ask for? Go ahead.
To hold a feast in the wilderness.
Okay. How far out into the wilderness?
3 days early.
How good do you think Pharaoh's going to feel about that one? Now, is that all that was ever intended? No, the intent is, just like God had told him before in the meeting, this is going to be where Israel is going to be released from captivity. No longer going to be slaves. They're going to go back in and dwell in the land of Canaan. That's the point. Why this being said first then? Why the request to go and keep a feast 3 days into the wilderness? That's God who says it. Why does he give that first?
To see the work, see
Oh.
the hardness of his heart.
All right. What does God already know about that?
Too hard.
Okay. What he's pointing out to them is this is not going to be something where he's going to say yes to anything. And from Pharaoh's point of view, it's obvious that he thinks these people ought to be slaves. They're duly his, and therefore he's not going to let him go do anything. Instead of letting them go and be more free, I guess you would say, what does he do in response? Okay, how does he make it harder? Okay, made them go get their straw instead of delivering it to them. So now they've got to search around throughout the country for straw with which to make bricks. What else? All right, you have that quota being kept there, yet the straw is not going to be given. So in essence, it makes their work harder. What else? Okay, you have the beating that starts to take place there, and not just the beating of some slaves out there, this time after the people who are officers among the Israelites, when they're with Moses and Aaron on this, they're the ones that are beaten. It's not just the average worker. This is even their officers that are ones that go through these things. What else? Anything else?
I think it's notable that Pharaoh says, "Who's the Lord that I should obey his voice?"
Good. The point there of disdaining or having a rejection, a blasphemy of God, is pointed out by Pharaoh. He doesn't care who he is, and he doesn't care to find out. What's going to happen? He's going to find out. And he's going to find out that that was a wrong move to make of having such disdain for the God of heaven. What else takes place? There's a anger that Pharaoh has towards Moses, Aaron, and obviously their God in this way. Who else is mad about this meeting that Moses and Aaron have with Pharaoh?
The Israelites.
All right, why?
Because they're blaming Moses for the increased punishment and increased work.
Okay.
Moses.
So Moses says this is going to happen, that God's going to deliver his promise. As pointed out last time, even in Acts 7, Moses was sure of that back when he was 40, that God was going to deliver his promise. Now, here he is coming before him at 80, and he's certain that there's going to be a deliverance of this promise. But they are not. They're ones who are just looking at it and saying, we don't want to make a bad situation worse, rather than trying to risk the idea of us being brought into a freedom from slavery. We'd rather just keep it in the way that it is right now. And that seems to be their focus. All right, anything else there on that?
I think it's one of those stories you've read all your life. And I don't know the time frame, but just days earlier they were worshiping God when Moses gave them the news.
Right.
And then prior to that, they were groaning and complaining, and I guess, well, I'm going to pray to God for relief. And now the first test comes, and they just, now they're mad at the right person sent to answer their prayers.
It's just totally uncharacteristic of them when they go into the wilderness, isn't it? Tongue firmly in cheek. Obviously, they did this over and over again. This is the kind of way in which the people were again and again and again as you go through. Really, not just in the wandering. You take the people of Israel into the land, they're doing the same thing. This characteristic is there of a people who lacked of a faith to come from the stock of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. To come from those who God had delivered and shown his great power to. And yet to have this kind of a lack of faith is truly an amazing thing when you look at it, of how different Abraham was, who became the father of that nation, and it was because of him that God was going to bless. The people who are blessed are diametrically opposed to what their fathers in the faith were. Anything else there? All right, let's go next chapter. Chapter 6. God speaks to Moses. Now, what does he tell him?
I think it's important first, I don't know that it's a lack of faith in Moses, but he definitely has some questions. and so I think that his faith grows as God talks to him and reminds Moses who he is.
Is that uncharacteristic of Moses? Okay. We're going to see that again as well, that you have Moses that would test God on various cases that are here. And the Bible shows you warts and all of people that are leaders, those who are otherwise characters that demonstrated faith. It shows you their weak times as well, and the times where they didn't do that. Go ahead.
And we can read to the end of the story and see how it was at the end, and then look back and go, well, why did they complain? And
Yeah.
They didn't know.
Yeah.
They didn't know. I mean, they thought this first time he asked, they were going to get to go and it'd all be great. You know what I mean? So we see the end, and it's easier to second guess them when we see the end. You know, understand what
Right,
I'm saying?
right. My dad always told me anything worth having is worth working for, sacrificing for, and that's kind of the way that is necessary for them to learn that too. When we get something easily, how much do we think of it? Don't think much of it at all. But when we have to work and deal with things, it becomes a part of our investing in that and that what. Then you have something that's worthwhile. All right. Go ahead, Kurt.
Well, I mentioned it Sunday, but I think it bears repeating that this whole thing is going to be, at least for that period of time, the most demonstrative, action of God's power over and over and over again. And he is going to refer back to this event repeatedly to remind this stubborn and stiff-necked people that he has the power to do whatever he wants with them, and that they need to stop running to other gods. So this is, I don't want to put it lightly, this is a big deal. And it should be emotionally and spiritually and historically a huge event. And they're whining.
Yeah. Right. Chapter 6, when we talk about God speaking to Moses, there are three main points I want you to notice here. First one is in God telling Moses who he is. What's the distinction he makes about who he said he was to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and who he is relating to Moses that he is? He's known by what name to Moses? Okay, Jehovah or Yahweh in that statement. Why? Why? Before we get there, maybe make it a little easier, what was he known to Abraham as? God Almighty, El Shaddai, is the name that was given. God, the Almighty or all-powerful, Elohim, Shaddai. And that's a terminology that talks about God has the power to be able to deliver. He has the power to show who he is, that he's greater than man. What does the term Yahweh mean? What's the purpose of that? Do what? Okay. You have that being used in that way. What's?
Self-existent.
Okay. You have I am that I am is pointing out the eternal one. He's self-existent. He's eternal. There's no one there before it is an I became or I was, all of that. But Yahweh is given specifically as a term of the covenant. It's a term of the God that is there, who is their unique God. That's why he gives the name Yahweh. He had not given that before to anyone else. That's unique to Israel. What's the point of that? Our Jehovah's Witnesses friends miss it a country mile. They say, oh, we ought to call him Yahweh. That's the special name of God. To Israel, that was the special name, but that they're given a special name unto this God, a covenant name for themselves. What does that mean? God has done what? He's revealed himself to them in ways he has not to everybody else. That's the point. This idea of a covenant name is God gives himself, reveals himself to Israel as he's never done to anyone else, not even to Abraham. God did not give Abraham all of the things of the Old Covenant, the Old Testament, the law, the prophets, the Psalms. He didn't give that to Abraham. But this is a special blessing that's given unto those who are the Israelites. Now, what's the point of all of that? Same God, more information, where's it leading us to? Ultimately. All right, it's leading us to the Christ. It's leading us to the full and final revelation that we have in the gospel of Jesus Christ. So you have a covenant name here. And now you have them calling upon him in that way. It's interesting to me that if you put that to a parallel in the New Testament, you have a covenant name involved in the New Testament as well. Not God's name, but our name, Christian. What does that mean? I am of Christ. I'm his. It's a stamp upon us that that's what we're known by. Acts 11, verse 26, the disciples were called Christians first at Antioch. There are 3 times that word Christian is used in the New Testament. It's used here, called, Acts 11, verse 26, with the word that has to do with krematizo, which is a calling of God. It's a God-issued name, if you will. Some would say it was given in derision. No, the Bible very clearly, and Isaiah says that there would be a new name by which his people are known. Only one I know of that is Christian. It's the krematizo. Same thing that you have several times in the New Testament where that's called of God. Romans chapter 7 talks about if this woman was out here, she's married to another man, while her husband still lives, she'll be what? Called an adulteress. There's krematizo. The world isn't calling her that. God is. That's the point of God's summation of who she is. That's what you see in that word. Here you have the name given of God, that covenant name. In the New Testament, there's a parallel to that of what God calls us. He gives us the name of God in the flesh, the Christ. Anybody else there? Okay, that's one. Number 2 thing that I want you to notice is that he talks about the fact that I am going to deliver you out of this bondage. And what's Pharaoh going to do about all this? Do what?
In the beginning, he's not going to let them.
Okay. There's a hardening process that goes on here. I want you to watch this as we go all the way through, more and more into this account through the plagues. You have in some places in Exodus, it says that Jehovah hardened Pharaoh's heart. Now, does that mean that God made him do evil and he had no free will? Absolutely not. How do I know that? Because in other places, Pharaoh saw this and he hardened his heart. In the active voice, it was him, not God who was hardening. It was him who was hardening. And then you have the statement being made of how the process went. That as these things happened, one after another, to thwart Pharaoh, that God was bringing about the hardening of Pharaoh's heart. Now look at that. All 3 are so. And they don't demand the elimination of the other. How did God harden Pharaoh's heart? Did he have anything to do with it? Yes. He comes, he faces Pharaoh with making a decision. He causes that decision to have to be faced. And what does he know about Pharaoh? Pharaoh's going to decide the wrong thing. When God brings and forces that issue, it forces him to go one way or another. But when he goes one way or another, on what basis does he do that? That's where Pharaoh hardened his own heart. He makes that decision. God didn't make him do wrong. He gave him the opportunity, but he understood clearly the mind that was there of Pharaoh. God foreknows many things that he does not cause to happen. If you want to look at that over in Romans 7, that's a pretty clear point. That who God foreknew, those he foreordained. Now, I think it's pretty clear, all of us would understand the fact that God foreordained for people to be saved in Christ. It wasn't individuals in an arbitrary sense. Now, somebody says, well, could God have known, or did God know about those who would be saved before that time? I don't want to speculate on that. The Bible doesn't give me an answer except for one that I can think of real clearly, and that's Judas. Because in the Psalms, you have Judas being shown to come to his end and death at his own hand and being lost. And that's before Judas ever lived. Now, how did God know that? Because he's God. He can know those things. Does that necessarily mean that he made him do that? No, just the opposite. You're out on the street, you're watching a car come down at 70 miles an hour down a neighborhood street, and you see out there's some little kid that's going to go right out and chase their ball in front of this car that's blocking the view of that driver speeding. Do you know what's going to happen? So do I. That kid's going to get either hurt real bad or killed. Did you make it happen? You didn't make it happen. You foreknew it. Now, God foreknows that which is or has the possibility of foreknowing all things. Does that mean he caused it to be? Nope. That means he created a world in which he stepped back. He knows the end outcome if he desires to do so, or can keep that knowledge from himself. In either way, he's all powerful. But foreknowledge is different than the idea of predestining, an arbitrary predestining of something to be so. Anybody got any questions there? God did it, Pharaoh did it, and the situation did it. Just depends on which one you're talking about, from what angle. Go ahead, Jason.
I was just thinking about 1 Timothy 4, 2, where it talks about the conscience being seared. That's similar in my mind, where that conscience is there because of principles originating with God, and when they're ignored or fought against or made differently to a point where you're hardened, like Pharaoh is hardened or seared.
Same thing in 2 Thessalonians 3, toward the end, that here are people who believed the lie, and that they were condemned even while they were living. Why? It's not because God made them. It's because they hardened that heart to the process. They weren't turning around. All right? Anything else there? Third part that I want you to remember is, in all of this process, what would happen when God called Israel out and showed them the power to bring them out of Egypt? Why was that going to be done? Was it just for these people who were captives in Egypt? What was the purpose? Okay. There you have not only that all the nations around them would know, they would understand the great power of Jehovah God. But also, what about these children that came after these original Israelites who left the land? These would be told. That's the purpose of the Passover. The Passover was the retelling of this each year, so that they would again have this brought before them. There are markers, if you will, that are used of evidences of God and His power and His loving nature. All of that are ones that when you put those into place, it not only has an effect on the people in the first time that it happened, but it has an effect on everybody who hears all around about. During the Exodus and the wandering, we'll hear that all of the people in that area had heard exactly what had happened down in Egypt. And also those who follow after them. When it's recorded, as it is in the Pentateuch here, or the first 5 books of the Old Testament, then you know very clearly how this all happened, and it's a testimony to the power of God. All right, anything else there? What's the latter part of the 6th chapter about? That's where you've got what? All right, you got some genealogies there that are pointed out. If you notice the statements that are made, verse 14 of Exodus 6 talks about Reuben, and then you've got the sons of Simeon, verse 15. verse 16, you've got the sons of Levi. And then from there on, what you're dealing with is Levitical groups and how it was that they were the sons and so forth on down through those generations. Okay. Exodus 7. First part. Do what?
2 miracles.
Okay. What are they? What's the miracle that's performed that God tells Moses and Aaron that he's going to have them to do before Pharaoh? The meeting of chapter 6, this had already been laid out. What is it? Aaron takes his rod, throws it down, it becomes a serpent. Now Pharaoh wants to show, that's nothing big deal. He gets his magicians. They do the same. There are also serpents that are thrown down. Might be interesting when you look at this account and other accounts of this as it is given. The word that is used for what the snake was, just a normal snake, like the magician's rod, was the word nehash. And the word that is used for the serpent from Aaron's staff is a different form of that, intensified. What it means is a very large reptile. Most of the time, if you read about this, you're going to have most commentators say that this was a crocodile that came out. May have been. However, I think its likeness being given, this is probably one of those that you'd talk about more like a boa constrictor versus some small snake. They did the small snake. He had the boa constrictor, and it swallowed him, and without too much of a problem. What did that show? Supremacy. Okay. The premise that they need to start with is to understand that God's power is greater than theirs. It's through sorcery that they do these things. The sleight of the hand, that is still practiced by people today. But the practice that Aaron and Moses were using was a miracle, that which was divine in its place. When you go over to chapter 7 of Acts, Stephen is talking about this as signs and wonders, the same terminology that's used in Mark 16 of how they were going to be ones who would go out and demonstrate the viability of the gospel or the truth of that by confirming the word by the signs that follow. Anything else there? Go ahead.
Powerful foreshadowing there of things that are to come as far as the power of God being what predominating.
Yeah. All right. Now, second part of that chapter is about what? All right, water into blood. That is there, even the river. The Nile is never referred to as the Nile in the sense of just a boundary post. There are a couple of times when the term is used. However, it's predominantly called the same thing that the Euphrates is, the river. The Euphrates in one area of the Fertile Crescent, the Nile down in Egypt, it's that which makes everything possible. It's the source of the life that's there. When Moses is to strike the water and make it blood, now, what's the problem that they have at that point? Do what? I heard somebody. Okay, don't have anything to drink. What else? All right, all the fish die. The fish can't survive in that. All right, nothing there of that being able to do. Go ahead, Scott.
So if the water was already blood, how did the magicians act like they turned it into blood?
Yeah, they evidently taking some spring or something that was set aside, and they did this. I have no idea, but that's what it seems like. We aren't given that knowledge. What does it smell like? How many of you have been around a lot of blood? I think that's one of the things that when I've interviewed soldiers in warfare, one of the things that just sticks in their mind that they can't get out of as part of the difficulty is that blood. And I told you before, I worked in my uncle's meat packing plant, and right now, even thinking about it, I'm tempted to get nauseous. It's sickening. It's kind of a smell that you can't ever get out of your mind. How long does this stay that way? Trying to get something to drink and having this, can you imagine the atmosphere that was there in Egypt for 7 days? They fancied themselves the most cultured people in the world. Their Pharaoh called himself God. As a matter of fact, he was the God by this time in Egyptian lore. By this time, the Pharaoh said that he was the God who produced Ra, who was before the great God that produced them, the pharaohs. Now, they taught that Ra was produced by the pharaohs. And so he was supposed to be the most powerful. Yet, in all of that claim of the most powerful, can he do a thing to reverse this? Not a thing. The only thing they could do was cause some water to be made into blood. Well, big deal. It already was through most of it in whatever form of sorcery or magic that they tried to do, sleight of hand. That still didn't suggest that there was truly anything that was of noteworthiness there about being some miracle that was taking place. Anybody else have anything on that? Okay. Let's remember we're going to be going, is that the second one? Yeah. Okay. Going to be going into the plagues from here on. Next Wednesday, Kurt's also going to be teaching. I'm not going to be here. I have one procedure, oral surgery on Wednesday, and they tell me I'm not going to feel too great after that. And then I've got another procedure the next